What have you noticed in the space?
It's changed, but it's not changed enough. I think the old way, in a nutshell, of L&D has gone.
Have you experienced difficulty in changing a culture?
Being able to bring in the use of kind of artificial reality, virtual reality for people to experience that, make it as realistic as possible without making it seem silly in some respects.
Department, or was it actually something that was kind of exactly fine? Do you know what I mean? Was there
When people start to see the data and start to see actually it is resulting in higher pass marks.
what works now versus what works, let's say, 10 years ago, and why?
Just over a decade ago, in terms of the retailer I was working with, we were a compliance-heavy organisation.
What we'll probably do, if you don't mind, Paul, is just start from just the very beginning for you, really, which is you've come to the point now where you've started your own HR consulting company. Is that correct? So, you know, you've been in this space for 20 odd years and more, working in a variety of forms. So to take us briefly through that journey so we can get a little bit of an understanding of why you are where you are today and what happened in between, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. So I'll start at the beginning. Probably best way to start. So I started out working for a large retailer, doing a lot of their management training team leaders, senior managers, store managers around, what great leadership looks like. The company at the time was, quite widely known across the UK, one of the big four in terms of the retailers, and really, really caught a flair for like leadership and management development training. And kind of wanted to test how far that went. So I was in the HR space, in the kind of legal compliance space, and wanted to kind of go like further into that. So went into the public sector for a bit, did leadership and management training in relation to some public sector roles, really started to kind of test the market in terms of, what's out there in terms of tools. Started quite small in terms of, classroom learning management systems, then really started to scale it. And you're talking like, 100, 200,000 pound a year learning management platforms that these companies are investing in. And then went from there, went into a head of L&D space over a number of years, set up a learning management system across like a whole country, which is fun, and really making learning accessible to all. So rather than, every separate organization working on their own learning, only sharing it with themselves, trying to make as much like open source learning as possible to share with other people. And then kind of went from there, went back into HR because I didn't want to be seen as just a trainer. Really kind of went back into HR space, head of HR, director of HR, and then went into private equity, did a little bit of work there around learning in relation to field-based and desk-based workers to really create some variety in terms of learning, because I'd worked in that, always worked for companies that are disparate, covered like whole counties, whole countries, that sort of thing. So it made sense to try something a little bit different. And then I really caught the bug around kind of like, how far can I take this? So been operating in the charity space for about 4 years now, been working with various charities around that kind of greater good purpose, and created my company off the back of that around really wanting to give back. I've done my time in the private sector. I've done my time in very expensive organizations, and I kind of felt like actually with the knowledge I've got, I want to give back, want to create that kind of low cost entry offer to be able to support charities so they can deliver their missions, and take their expertise that I got, particularly from the L&D space around cost-effective learning, around, classroom learning being the absolute gold standard. So we shouldn't just default to it as type, and really kind of looking at what can we scale, what can we offer, even in the case of what can we share for free with other organizations, so that actually they don't have to go out and spend over the odds to get something that other people are accessing for free. And that hope of, in the way of giving back, you also get back. So yeah, I've been running my company now for about 2 months. I've been working quite closely with...
Oh, wow. So it's okay.
Insanely new, yeah. Working with a couple of charities, working with a couple of IT companies and a couple of other ones in that space, and really just kind of enjoying that time of giving back and really seeing actually what I can learn from those charities and share with others.
Great. Thank you for that, Paul. We'll explore, I think, where you're at now a little bit later.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do, I suppose, is go into the kind of what are the main things you've seen change over the last, let's say, I appreciate you've been in the space for 20 plus years, but let's just even look sort of just pre-COVID, post, pandemic, that kind of, what have you noticed in the space? What changes have you noticed? And also, like, I appreciate you've just started this new company, so you've obviously you've been working, with these other areas pre that new launch. So, what are the trends that you've noticed really over the last kind of 5 years up until to this particular point?
It's a good question. I think for me, I think one of those trends was really kind of pushed on us around, learning in its whole form, I think died during COVID. The kind of classroom first, all the kind of training companies that were like, we'll book a venue, like 12 to 20 of you turn up and do this thing. And I've spoken to quite a few fellow HR consultants that are in that space that post-COVID have just not seen the demand for that anymore. And I think that the convenience that we got alongside the pain during the pandemic around learning has really pushed that space on kind of later than it should have been, but not soon enough. Kind of 2018, when I went into a head of L&D role, I was really pushing for hybrid learning. Classroom is the gold standard. Let's save it for the best bits when we need to practically have people meet, but leveraging that e-learning, that pre-learning. The organization I was working for at the time had the ability to bring in LinkedIn learning and using kind of video-based learning to support individuals, so that the leadership and management offer that we had just didn't evaporate overnight because we weren't able to bring people into classrooms. That absolutely has its space, whether you're looking at that kind of 70-20-10 model around having the ability for people to learn, but then also that kind of let's put it into practice. And for me, I think one of the key things that's changed is that's not going away. We are seeing more of that kind of self-led learning, individuals pushing more for learning organizations and creating that psychological safety that you can make a mistake, you can learn from it, you can then share that learning onwards. And I think we're at a really exciting point now in terms of what we're seeing in terms of AI, in terms of kind of agentic AI. That next natural space, I think, is that, it's almost like that training needs analysis on steroids, that it's not just you filling in a spreadsheet around, oh, I'm amazing and I'm so modest and look at all these things I know, but maybe being tested on what you do know. And then that kind of learning pathway that you get from there is kind of built on the fly, as opposed to that necessary need for, a trainer who's always one step ahead. And it's an exciting time, but I think that it's changed, but it's not changed enough. I think the old way, in a nutshell, of L&D has gone. The classroom, sage on a stage, 200 slide PowerPoints are a thing of the past, and the sooner we let them go, the better. But really having that come together time with intention, that when we do need to bring together to practice something, to role play it, to act it out, gorgeous, that ain't going away. But where people can interact and talk and kind of learn from each other, much like you and I are now, I think it's much more convenient than, being stuck in traffic for 2 hours for a 3-hour classroom course.
Yeah, agreed. Well, 100% agree. And I agree with you as well. Gold standard to me is a really top hybrid model. For personally, where you've got to have the human interaction. I work for, obviously we work very closely with online tools. We're working extremely closely with artificial intelligence to enable, better learner pathways, to do the kind of things you've just literally been talking about. That's exactly what we're doing. But that doesn't mean that we don't believe that humans benefit from humans and human insights and human interactions. And those are still extremely key to all of this, which is why we work so closely with organizations to ensure that, we mirror exactly what it is that they're looking for. But let's just unpick a little bit, because one of the things I think that we've noticed is there's a generational shift, and in terms of like models that you would look to adopt, have you ever have you experienced difficulty in changing a culture in terms of how they adopt different methods of learning or different approaches to how they then take on things? Have you found it easier with us? Now, that's not to generalize, because I appreciate that, within all generations that we talk about, there are people who do this and people who do that, and I really don't want to generalize, but there are patterns that generally we do see. So what have you noticed from there, and the things that you've had to overcome or run into brick walls with and all that kind of stuff? Like, what have you noticed?
It's such a good point, and I think for me one of the most recent ones I saw was in the training of firefighters. And when I first encountered some of the learning materials, they're talking about examples that are valid because, fire as a kind of, based on physics hasn't really changed since the discovery of physics. But the relevancy of the examples around, here's an example of a fire from the 1960s can start to feel less valuable in terms of a relevant, credible example. So being able to bring in the use of kind of artificial reality, virtual reality for people to experience that in a kind of, make it as realistic as possible without making it seem silly in some respects has been really key. And I think that getting people away from that's the way we've always done it. So that's the way we have to continue to do it. Space of, when I joined this organization, this is what my learning pathway looked like. So therefore, everyone I train for the next 1,000 years must follow that pathway. Those are probably some of the most, the hardest individuals to unpick because they saw that as their path to come into the organization. If someone doesn't enter through that door, have they really entered the organization? But really changing that. So one of the ways that I changed an example of this was around neurodiversity, around building assessment pathways to account for individuals who have autism. And what you saw from the theory space in terms of testing was people going from a 60% pass rate to a 90% pass rate because you built the learning for their needs rather than having to ask for it. You kind of adjusted it to allow and support them. And that kind of eye-opening moment for people who've kind of gone, well, we've always done it that way, but the evidence shows this way is better, kind of gets them to see actually maybe there is a benefit in changing it. Maybe, it might seem like a really, funky idea to have like a robot that fights fires for you. And that, in some respects, sunsetting but we've always had a human do that. I saw it in the retailer I worked for when we brought in Scan as Your Shop, and that whole thing of, well, we're going to lose 8 checkouts and then suddenly we're going to have all these machines that tell you it's an unexpected item in the bagging area. What does that mean for the staff? And it's a change of skills, and that creating not necessarily people being able to go, I learned that in the 1990s and I'm going to hold on to it with a death grip, but that kind of learning to unlearn. And, that new things are going to come along, that there's going to be new technology that comes out that actually, I've seen there's a retailer now experimenting with weighable like trolleys. I've seen that McDonald's, when you order a delivery, they weigh your food before it comes out because they know the precise weight of a double cheeseburger. And that kind of learning those new skills, because things are going to change. By the time you and I reach retirement, who knows what that's going to look like in terms of the ability to learn. And we owe it to every generation that's part of our workforce that actually we don't leave them behind. That the model, okay, it hasn't changed in 10 years pre-COVID around the way we've done training, but just because it hasn't changed doesn't mean it shouldn't have done, doesn't mean we should always leave it that way. So that ability to train that agility, that actually your job is going to change. Some of what you do is probably going to be picked up by a machine. Some of your, you won't have a diary in which to write stuff. And, to back to your question, I remember one of the things that I used to have at school was this thing around a record of achievement, that this kind of giant folder that you'd fill every city. Mine's in the loft. I have not touched it since I left school. I have no plan to touch it since I left school.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the thing, is that it's, for some people that kind of qualification collecting is amazing. But for others, it's kind of, I'll learn enough to do what I need to do, but I don't need a badge or a certificate to say that I know how to do it.
Absolutely. I think that's something I've always noticed as well. The one size fits all approach just doesn't, you can't make it work. I mean, down to an individual learner level, all the way through to rolling out a system across a country level or a large or complex organization. You just can't have this here's the solution, and so you guys just adopt it. It's like, doesn't work that way. It never has and never will. Even though people might promise the earth and beyond, it doesn't. So I totally appreciate the kind of, I think what you were getting at a little bit, unless you correct me, is one of the things you did with the neurodiversity thing was adopt a more of a learner first philosophy. So instead of going from like, here's the company first and how we then just roll out L&D, you went, well, hang on. Let's reverse it a little bit. Let's look at the individual and look at where they're coming from so that we can push them upwards rather than you just cascade downwards, right? Which, obviously in hindsight makes perfect sense, but it took a while for people to catch on. Now, and one of the issues I think some organizations might have with that is that when you do a learner first philosophy, it can be quite resource heavy, because people need people in some cases, and so when you go with the learner first approach, now I appreciate that might change now more with better learning management systems, AI being used, all that stuff. So there is a sea change, but it can be resource heavy. So did you notice a shift when you did that neurodiversity, when you introduced these kind of new concepts? Did it put extra strain on the L&D department, or was it actually something that was actually fine? Do you know what I mean? Was there a...
It's a good question, and it did initially, because the skepticism around, we love this old assessment, we've always done this old assessment. Why, it's the same quiz that I was asked when I was in my 20s. So now that I'm in my 50s, you must have the same questions. The team wanted to run that alongside the new assessment. And that kind of running two tests at the same time can be quite resource intensive. What we learned from that was two things. One, new courses were sharing the answers with the next course. So in terms of that fair and ethical assessment, sharing the answers via WhatsApp was the way people were doing it. So we ended up kind of going with a little bit of both approach around, actually, let's get a question set that's much larger than what we're going to ask. Even, a lot of learning management systems can pick your randomized questions, rotate your answers so that it's not, the answer to question one is not always C, so on and so forth. But yeah, initially, because of the skepticism, because of the disbelief, it was kind of, we want to hold on to the old, but we kind of want to test the new. So I probably, in reflection, maybe would have run that on a smaller scale, so it wasn't a case of we're doubling up on everything. But when people start to see the data and start to see actually it is resulting in higher pass marks, people are, they are just as safe. They are just as knowledgeable as where they've done this other test. But actually the gateway to entry is much larger to support the greater knowledge around the neurodiversity of the workforce. The benefits shared early enough started to convince people, actually, maybe we do need to sunset the old assessment. Maybe we do need to say goodbye to the way we've always done things. And it's that the key to it has been that kind of safety to show people, actually, it's okay to test. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to say goodbye to that which you've always done before.
Yeah, absolutely. So how has the way people actually consume learning fundamentally changed from your perspective? And what works now versus what worked, let's say, 10 years ago, and why?
It's a good question. And I think for me, I've seen more focus around why should I learn that? And, what's the benefit, the what's in it for me around learning it. I remember like just over a decade ago, in terms of the retailer I was working with, we were a compliance heavy organization, and every quarter, half year, month, you'd have a compliance checklist come out, and it was a printed sheet that you get sent in as an HR manager. You'd have to dish them out to everyone in the store. And if you've been there long enough, and I'd been at that retailer for just over a decade, you knew the answer to every question. I could shut my eyes and I knew that the answer to that was that abbreviation stood for that. And all I was doing was, I was ticking a box. It was, yes, I was covering the compliance training, but I wasn't really learning anything, and what's changed since then is the what's in it for me, the kind of, if I need to know this because it's, it covers the Health and Safety at Work Act, or it's something that I need to demonstrate my duty to the public sector equality duty or the Equality Act, then great. From a compliance perspective, I understand that. But there's more to it than that. How do I create an effective and ethical workplace? In the, some of the charities I'm working with these days, how do we enable that effective animal welfare as soon as reasonably possible after someone joins? You can't compliance that down to some sort of vanilla boringness. It needs effective demonstration. It needs examples. It needs lived recent examples to make it real, and tying it to that value around why you should learn it, because it has better outcomes for the customer in the retail sector. It has better outcomes for the people in the members of the public in the public sector. It has better outcomes for animals in kind of more recent terms. Or like back to the McDonald's example, it makes for a tastier cheeseburger that doesn't poison people or something. That kind of, what does it do for me? How does it make my life easier? How does it help me serve customers better? It needs those kind of structured pieces to kind of make it better for the individuals and the people they serve.
So on that then, are you more in tune really now with kind of more evidence-based outcomes? Because when you're talking about just a compliance sheet from like 10 years ago, where like you could just go, I mean, I know this. Ultimately, it means nothing. It means literally nothing, really. So when you're talking about in the new space where you train people on certain things, is for you success measured then by the evidence that they can provide to show that they are equipped to do the things that you're expecting them to do? And how does that, and if that's the case, how do you expect that to, pardon the language here, manifest itself in a real way? Like how, as a HR manager now, what would you expect to see? Like, what would you expect to see in terms of, okay, here's the evidence. How can I see that?
It's such a good point. And I think that I really like, it's a bit dated now, but I really like the kind of medical approach to it, the kind of see one, do one, teach one, in terms of, the part of the test of people being great at it is that ability to train someone else and that ability to kind of pass on your knowledge. Because if you truly understand it, being able to kind of explain it to someone else, take them through that kind of explain it, demonstrate it, have them imitate you, and then have them perform it on their own. Whether you want to go as far as getting into the kind of nerdy realm of like the conscious, competence model or that sort of environment, but that ability for me, that true test is actually, can you share it? Because our workforce isn't getting any younger. The organizations that I work with, the charity space has some stereotypes in relation to the typical people that you find in it in terms of age, but it runs a real risk of the knowledge that people have picked up over all that years just leaving. Whereas that ability to kind of train it onto other people, I'm seeing some organizations now that when people announce that they're retiring, that person comes out of their role for a year and then coaches their successor to pass on all their knowledge. So for me, I think that key success and that kind of key measure of you've got it is that ability to show you can do it, but then train someone else. If you can't pass the knowledge on, then it kind of makes you wonder, where is that knowledge going other than out the door?
There are going to be some sectors, I think, obviously, that there are going to be changes massively. I think we know already that there's going to be quite a shift in certain roles which are not really going to be available as much, just simply because of the rise of artificial intelligence and technology, and how some of those things are just going to, and we're seeing it already in society, slowly just kind of shifting. And at the other end of the scale, we're seeing, as you've rightly pointed out, sort of generations that have all of this knowledge are just sort of going now, okay, my time is kind of done now, and so I'm gonna either pass the torch or I'm just gonna leave completely, and we're not gonna say anything again. So, like, what skills do you think at the moment either sorely lacking in some of the organizations that you're seeing coming through, which is going to be a big issue, or what are the things in the next few years where you think that you really do need to address that are coming up?
Good question. I think in terms of what's lacking at the moment, I think that ability around learning outside of a learning department and that whole kind of, the kind of that learnability as a whole, I think is one of the things that's missing at the moment, because I still see some organizations that kind of push it to go, I need some training. I'm going to go find a person that can, do me some training, or I'll farm it out to a learning and development department to generate me something that can then train me up on it. We're starting to see some of that kind of curated learning from some people, where they'll go out and learn as much as they can on YouTube, but what's missing is that kind of that so what factor. You can watch oodles of video learning, but if you're not going to put it into practice, what's the point? And I think that leads into the kind of the skills that we need in the future, is that ability to put it into practice. Whether you're looking at certain like social media platforms as micro learning, or you're looking at kind of short form videos, or even audio clips, or something that kind of takes things from what you're learning now to that kind of putting it into practice space. I think for the future we need that ability to kind of what we know now and the way we do things now probably won't be the same in a decade. The way that I operate as an HR consultant is probably going to be very different in a decade's time, let alone for the law changes, but the practice changing. So, I mean, even some of the work I've been doing recently, where people have come back to me with some really gorgeous questions that they've used, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot to generate those questions. And you read them and you think these have come from someone who is very, very well versed in, acting as a union rep or acting as a kind of solicitor. And you kind of, realize it's come from an AI. How do we create that kind of leveled space where if our customers, our colleagues, our clients are going to be using it, then how do we as organizations also enable that fair use? I mean, seeing it in the recruitment space now, you see adverts go out where they say if you submit an advert or submit a submission via AI, then it may well be rejected. But if then in that space we're using AI to sift candidates, it's potential unfairness in some respects. So I think that for me, that future space is around, how do we level that playing field? How do we create that space that what now, you may need to unlearn and then kind of relearn in the future?
In terms of technology, you've been around for a while in terms of this space, and so like technology's obviously evolved quite rapidly over the last 5-10 years, even in the last 12-24 months. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Even the stuff that we do now, I kind of go, wow, that's insane. Is technology something that you are embracing in terms of what the future holds? Are you a little bit wary because of what the capabilities are? Or are you, where are you on that scale, I suppose, would be, certainly in your role and what you're seeing?
So for me, I love being an early adopter. So I've been playing around with ChatGPT since it kind of appeared in like the early 2020s. I've been, kind of playing around with that space around so what, new models come up, learning about prompts, learning about those sorts of spaces. For me, I love that early adoption. So, whilst I'm not the person to kind of queue at like 3 a.m. if something's going to open, I'm definitely in that kind of like first 100 people, really just to kind of experiment with it. Because, when you get a question come in, around, can we do this? That I don't like not knowing. So yeah, learning about it early on, I absolutely love. I don't have any reservations around it, because for me, I'm purely in that kind of experimentation phase at the moment. I think what's missing from that element of being a consultant running their own consultancy is that I haven't got the kind of £1 million to invest in the kind of like platinum diamond tier level systems, which, runs the risk of me kind of, almost having a ceiling in place as to what I can access. But, learning about the whole kind of like, creative pathways, kind of self-development pathways for individuals, it sounds like a fascinating space. And the sooner it becomes that kind of open source, open access, the ability for more people to access because it hasn't got a $250,000 a year price tag on it, then, I'm all for it. So yeah, for me, definitely an early adopter, like experimenting with it. I haven't counted anything out yet in terms of, oh no, it's too scary or we're not ready for that. Even just to kind of go, I've seen ChatGPT, Gemini used, for example, for kind of assessments in terms of, here's this question, here's my answer, pick holes in it, tell me what my gaps are. And even using it as a coach rather than it just being, we only use it for this. I think that flexibility is key to kind of really nailing this.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you say it could do all sorts. I mean, it would be things like, AI tutors, as you say, and the ability to sort of mark work and grade work and give feedback and, add efficiencies to what people are doing in the workplace is it's obviously a no-brainer. But I do obviously have conversations with a lot of people who are the opposite. Like you're genuinely very worried that it's taking away the human element. But I think my personal view, and I think the view of my company and a lot of others obviously in the space, is that AI isn't going to take away people's jobs because of AI. It's going to take away people's jobs who don't use AI effectively. Because really, it's not going away now. I mean, they may at some stage, obviously, governments and whatever might put some kind of protocols in place to say this is what can and can't be done in the space. But I don't think it's going anywhere very soon. And so, have you noticed? Obviously, you're in the consultancy space now, and you've been involved in very large scale organizations for a number of years. Have you noticed kind of at sort of senior level reticence to adopt particular technologies or to adopt certain things around artificial intelligence? And do you foresee issues around organizations not, because they're not adapting, being left behind?
It's a good question. And I think for me, the one kind of repetitive thing is, we've always had a learning management system of this style. So therefore, we're always going to have a learning management system of this style. I think the challenge has often been in that repetition of we've always had this, so therefore we always want to have this. I think some of the reticence is, like I said earlier, around that's the way we've always done things, so that's the way we'll always continue to do things. I think it needs that space to be able to, go, let's test the options, rather than rolling out a kind of organizational wide learning management system. Is there something we can start small with and then scale it to be able to, roll it out across an organization? Because particularly for large scale organizations, rolling out a learning management system for a whole country or rolling it out for individuals across like 500,000 people can be quite scary if you're sharing it with 500,000 people. So that ability to kind of start small and scale it and experiment, so it's not a kind of, it's not holding on to that safety space of, well, that's the way we've always done it, so we'll stick with our open source text-based learning management system, and more starting to kind of scale that experimentation around what else we can try. I think, to your point around senior management, I think they don't want it to fail. You don't want to stick £500,000 into a program and then find out it was a waste of money. So that ability to kind of start small, like a per headcount basis, buy into it, test it, scale it, that's key to kind of getting that kind of senior manager safety. But sometimes that safety appears as, well, I know that's safe because we've had it for a decade, so let's just have that again. I think that's going to be the thing that divides the difference between the organizations that are happy to experiment, are happy to fail, but on a small scale, and those that are like, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to stick with that, which we've always had.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. Before I lean into more of the stuff that you're doing at the moment, so in terms of your experience of technology at first hand, in terms of your roles in terms of HR, in terms of when you've rolled out things around, whether it might be, you said before, it might have been Moodle or specific learning management systems or particular content or whatever. So what have been the main bugbears that you've faced down the years with these kind of things? Because, it's not always everybody promises the earth and says, this is the best thing you'll ever see, or the best thing that'll ever be for your organization. Obviously, it invariably isn't. So what have been the main pitfalls or things that you've learned from in those kind of things?
It's having flashbacks. I think there's two bits here. I think from the low scale open source perspective, it's understanding what you're getting into when you do that. So when you do set up your own Moodle server and you start, running your own open source learning, how you configure server space and making sure you know what you're doing when you're building a specific domain for your learning management system. Trying to train L&D people on how to manage an IT infrastructure is not something I foresaw and was a very steep learning curve. But then I think from the kind of other end of the spectrum, which is one of my real main bugbears, was hidden costs. in terms of we at the time bought what we thought was an all-in-one solution that, it sounded amazing. It was want for nothing. Anything we wanted was granted. What I didn't realize is that every wish came with a massive invoice, and that actually the original thing that was sold was an off-the-shelf thing, and every bolt-on that you wanted with it, you'd have lemonade aspirations, and it would come with a champagne level invoice. And I think that's what kind of got me into that nervousness of, it's really expensive, it could end up more expensive. And I think, going to conferences, and you see in the conference space, the organizations that have got lots of money that are able to put on the massive showcases with the giant stalls, you kind of walk around and you're like, yeah, I can't afford that, just by the sheer kind of amount of like what they're showing. And I think the frustration is that, like, the fear of missing out, in terms of, you see these giant kind of spaces and what they're offering, and having known from the past around, it might look like a great offer, but does it come with a hidden price tag, kind of lures you into, maybe I should go back for something smaller, and ultimately kind of compromise on what I want. And all that's doing is that's just compromising on learner outcomes. It's compromising on what learners get from it. So, element of cynicism, element of wariness when it goes into kind of identifying learning providers, but definitely found out the hard way when it came to hidden costs.
I 100% agree. And I've been to many of these shows and seen from both sides, both from someone looking for a solution and looking to sort of how I'm going to embrace a new technology to sort of enhance the learning that my users were going through, to the other side, which is promoting and trying to create solutions for people. And I've been to those shows where, like, yeah, the biggest ones are there, and you're like, wow, like they must be amazing, because look at the size of these stands. But
Yeah.
it ain't always the case. I mean, I've seen firsthand that this doesn't, just because the biggest are there and they're the shiniest and the newest, it does not necessarily mean what you think it means. So
The only thing I've been able to guarantee from them is that once you get the best point, they're the ones that you get the best pens from and the best notepads when it comes to the conferences, in terms of the free swag that's available. You can get plenty of those. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. But yeah, as I say, shiniest doesn't mean the best, that's for sure. What do you think as a minimum right now, that you're in this space, you're doing consulting, you're helping out different organizations. Let's say they come to you and they say, I think we need some kind of online solution in some form, whether it be, not necessarily replacing the face-to-face one, that's what I'm talking about, but they need something. What do you think right now, moving into the next one, is a minimum requirement for any company looking to take on a solution which involves learning, e-learning, learning management? What for you is a minimum requirement right now?
Lovely question. I think it needs that. How do we build it into the flow of work? If it's a system that's like, right, great, here you go, day one, remember to do this training. Your diary's not full of much stuff when you first start. You're learning your way around things. You're probably going to have time to do it then. But when people, when there ends up more meetings in your day than you've got hours in the workplace, it takes a backseat. Learning and development always takes a backseat to everything else. Learning and development professionals are the worst at looking after themselves. It needs that in the flow of work, some sort of like antagonistic message that on a Monday morning goes, like your, learning management system says, I've not seen you in a while, you're, I'm lonely, or something that kind of prompts people to remember it's available. Or remember the days of when we had like Microsoft Word and you get the aggressive little the clippy, I think it was, that pops up. And that ability to kind of, if someone looks like they're struggling with something comes forward to help them. Because the whole, we don't sit in call centers with managers looming over our shoulders. There's a lot of hybrid working. There's a lot of working in the field. That ability to go almost like a workplace Google, I've got a problem, can I get some help? Or that ability for the system to reach out and say, you look like you're struggling this, would you like some help? Because the key to learning is knowledge. And how do you know you've got a gap when you don't know what you don't know? Again, it's back to the whole like unconscious incompetence element. I think the key for an effective learning management system is that it links into what you're doing. it spots what you're not doing. It kind of helps you out, not like Big Brother surveillance style, but really done from that perspective of, I want to make you the best possible person in this workplace. I want to get you to the absolute best so that you are, rather than it taking 18 months for you to get up to speed, it might take 8, it might take 10, it might take 12. But it's not a case of you have to go looking for it. The learning, comes for you without some sort of like sinister feel to it.
Which is good, which I'm glad you said all of that, because genuinely that's the vision and the things that we're trying to do. So this is good. Our actual, what we're doing, not that this needs to be part of this conversation, but is we're providing almost like weekly summaries of where you're at. Here are the things that, you've been doing really well at. We hear the things where it's coming up that you probably need to pay attention to because it's important to the compliance stats or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Just give them that kind of a weekly kind of email and on their profile, like, this is the stuff. This is the stuff you've got to do, right? So it's, as you say, it's that kind of a reminder, that kind of a, not a big brother kind of thing, but more of a kind of, look, come on, let's keep going. You're doing well. Let's see if we can do more kind of thing,
I think, when you watch an episodic TV program, and at the start of the TV program is like, last time on this program, happened, so much can happen or so much should happen in your days off that you kind of have that space to break away from work. So getting that kind of polite reminder of, here's what you aced last week. Here's what you could do with some support on. I think the one thing that's missing from that is that ability to, how does that feed into the line manager? How does that feed into the kind of wider organization? Because if every single person has got that gap across an organization, that's probably an institutional thing that actually we need to fix, rather than it being an individual thing that, one tiny intervention will fix it there. But it might mean that actually we've got onboarding wrong and that actually we need to add it in from the very beginning. So yeah, love all of those ideas.
Or what you can actually do, just to go, is because of how cool AI, if you implement AI solutions properly and effectively, you can do amazing things. So not only could you get the learning summaries, so the manager can then look at those learning summaries, and then it can get our internal AI to scrutinize all of those summaries and pick out the common pain points.
Oh, wow.
See? So it's just stuff like that, right? Which is like, it's really revolutionizing kind of how you can do things, And not only that, you can then literally go and create e-learning modules with that summary and say, go and create me a learning course based on these pain points, and then send them out to the guys who you've got issues with. Not bad.
That's very cool.
What's the one thing that you'd want everyone who watched this video, or saw snippets of this, to remember?
The one thing I'd want everyone to remember is test early, test often. And I think that kind of experiment, really, just start with stuff, because I think so many people are kind of waiting for stuff to be perfect. That they'll hold off and kind of test secretly, but fail. As long as it's not like, brain surgery, but if it's safe to fail, or you can create the space to safely fail, just do it. Because all of our first drafts were awful. I'm only here because I've made many mistakes. I've made some successes, but I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm better for it. So yeah, just the one thing I'd say to take away is start early, fail often, and you'll get better.
Yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes, especially, and learn from them. As long as you learn from them, people will forgive you, right? It's the ones who don't, who just
exactly
doing the same things over and again, right? Okay, if you could wave a wand and solve one challenge in learning and development or tech and HR today, what would it be?
If I could wave a magic wand, I would say, I think it'd be learning first, rather than kind of, learning's always that thing we sacrifice when tough, things get tough. But actually, we're basically getting rid of the one thing that helps us improve. As a human race, we're designed to evolve, to improve, whether it's us or it's our, the next generation that we help on. If I could wave a magic wand, it would be that actually it's a learning first mentality, and putting our kind of efforts into that, rather than the first time we need to make cuts, we shut down the training department, or we sell off the training silverware. It's around, if we get rid of that which makes us better, we're basically saying, cool, let's sit and rot.
What advice would you give to learning development leaders trying to innovate right now?
I would say having a good network around you of people that are in a similar position, because when you're at you're head of the profession for a learning environment, it can be very lonely, particularly when you're trying to drag a department into the 1990s, let alone into the current century. It can be very lonely when you're at the top. So having that really good network, however you get that, through conferences, through social media, through, whatever platforms, even, if you are engaging with a provider, that ability to go, well, who else is using that platform? Who else can I speak to as part of that? So yeah, I would kind of, hint at, you're not alone. Reach out to people that have either been there before, people that are there currently, even passing on that knowledge to people that are, they're going to go through it, after you. And, much to our point earlier about that kind of generational element, pass on that knowledge, pass on that comfort, pass on that actually it does get better. It does get less uncomfortable. That would be my advice.
Thank you for that, Paul. So we will be finishing up, but I'm going to ask you one more question. Looking ahead to 2 or 3 years, what will be the biggest game changer in learning development?
It will be interesting to see that kind of, I suppose, that learner authenticity around testing that actually people who are participating in learning activities, it is actually them. We're seeing a rise of, AI-based video content. I can confirm that I am a human today, but in 3 years' time, I could have a slightly thinner, better looking version of me on AI stepping in to do assessments for me. I think that the key to it is that validity of, if this is a person that is doing this test, how can we be assured that it is, that they've not, synthesized their voice through, online platforms that are available now, that they've created a video version of themselves, and that tech is available now. It's only going to get more complex. It's only going to get more sophisticated. And if we are testing humans, we need that authenticity. Or if we're not, and we just want people with that ability to answer the question, do we need to flip the model so that actually if people are doing this, are we okay with it? And if we're not, what safeguards are in place?
Yeah, lovely stuff. Thank you for your time.
Amazing.
You're really enjoying what you're doing now, and you're really obviously loving the fact you've made that change from, more of the corporate side, doing the things in the corporate world, and moving much more into more of a holistic kind of where your passions are, by the sounds of it, and where you want to see and make the most difference, and that kind of values led, making those stick and mean something. Is that really where you're seeing like big differences?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's kind of that, like, I don't want to say it's a midlife crisis, because I'm denying the fact that I am close to that age. But for me, it was that I don't want to kind of, get to the point of going, I've always worked for big corporates. I've always been with this organization 1,000 years. For me, it's around, I love what I love and I know what I know, and I want to find an organization that works with that. I get bored easily, so I change jobs often. So by switching into the consultancy space, I can work with multiple organizations. And then, if I've got, 10, 15, 20 different kind of employers that I'm working for, almost, it's hard to get bored.
Yeah.
So yeah, I probably wish I'd have made the jump sooner, but I'm cool that I've made it now.
Good. Well, look, it does sound exciting. I genuinely wish you the best.
Thanks.
Many thanks for listening to this episode of the Future of Learning podcast. And now, a final word from our prehistoric sponsors of today's episode.
My students use AI for answers. I stick to my 1985 encyclopedia set. Those facts, they don't expire.